We rumbled along as fast as the professor could get the BTR to go, but it was with growing horror that we could hear the demon screeching getting louder and louder the closer it came. My heart sank when I heard the roar of the beast seemed to overtake our vehicle, and I realized that we would be torn apart before the fighters arrived. Then, with a shock which ran up my spine, I felt a glimmer of hope. The last ground-shaking roar was that of a fighter jet. I opened up the hatch to see their beautiful, sleek, silver forms zoom past us, then bank sharply around.
Attention, attention, attention. This is Strike Lead. Do you read? Pilots, this is Mikhail Zemyanin. I'm in the BTR below you. I see you, Zemyanin,
said the MiG-21 flight leader.
Where is Major Rogov? Never mind that right now. What type of ordnance do you carry? We have air-to-ground rockets and 2 500-kilogram bombs.
The 2 silver MiG-21 fighters flashed low over our heads again, and the horror behind us stopped briefly to shriek at them, raising one of its massive claw arms to swipe at the jets.
They are unguided,
the pilot added. The professor gunned the engines of the BTR harder, trying to widen the distance between us and the demon from the void. At this point, we were less than 100 meters away from the thing.
So it's likely that we may be hit as well. Is that what you're saying? Perhaps,
said the pilot, apologetically.
You are danger close to the blast. What is that thing that's chasing you? That is the last gift of the Nazis to the motherland,
I answered. At this point, the narrow trail curved towards the right around an outcropping. The heavily snow-laden sloping mountain to our right rose nearly 300 meters, while the drop-off still to our left fell away into a ravine 50 meters below us. The professor had to slow the vehicle to make the right turn on the slippery snow and ice as the creature lumbered steadily on behind us.
Pilot,
I yelled.
We are at the approach to the Kolat Mountains that lead to the Dyatlov Pass. Can you strike the outcroppings that are ahead of us and to our right?
The 2 MiGs soared overhead again, their powerful jet engines drowning out the screeches of the monster.
You cannot be serious, Mr. Zemyanin. Your vehicle will be caught up as well. Not if Professor Golubev is as good a track driver as he was a T-34 driver,
I answered. I was the best in the entire goddamned Red Army, yelled the professor from the driver's compartment. This tin can is nothing. Go ahead. Do what you have to do. I'll make this thing fly if I have to.
Pilot, commence your run. Commence your run. Okay, we're going in. Keep your heads down and fly as quickly as possible. You will only have seconds to react.
Climbing down from the hatch and taking a seat next to Alina, I plopped an oversized vehicle crewman's helmet on her head before hugging her close to me. Hold on tightly, Alina. Things are going to get bumpy.
What's happening, Mr. Zemyanin?
Something crazy. Hang on. The air was suddenly filled with a hollow whooshing sound like that of a hurricane being forcefully pushed through a metal pipe as dozens of rockets impacted into the mountain beside us, followed by the earth-shattering vibrations of 4 500-kilogram bombs exploding nearly above us on the slopes as we rushed past. The rumble of the ground did not subside after the ordnance exploded, but rather picked up greatly, causing our little armored BTR to toss and tumble like a trawler caught up in a tidal wave as millions of tons of snow came crashing down the mountainside towards us. Hang on! This is going to be close! The BTR violently heaved to one side and I hit my head against something metallic as a raging avalanche of snow and ice crashed down the slopes of the mountain, tipping our BTR over and into the ravine. Colonel Andreev, sir, there are survivors! In the cold, dark space which I found myself, I could hear the muffled voice of a soldier somewhere outside, followed by frantic digging. I'm not sure how long I was unconscious, but I was absolutely freezing. My breathing labored. I was not upright at least, not that I could tell, but I could feel a warm body wrapped in my arms, soft moans filling the cold, pitch blackness. Alina, I said, are you okay? My head was pounding and I feared that I had suffered a concussion.
I think so,
Came a soft, pained reply.
Professor?
I'm fine, dear, came a weak voice from the driver's compartment. This isn't the first time I've been upside down in a tracked vehicle, but to tell you the truth, after the Battle of Kursk, I thought that would be my last time. Professor Golubev chuckled and said, "Ouch, ouch, ouch. Okay, that was a bad idea." "Try to relax, Professor," I said, talking to the darkness. "Don't try to move, you may have some broken ribs." I tried to move inside this pitch-black metal coffin, but found that I was pinned by something heavy which was pushing on my back, trapping my legs. Probably the radio mount. I reached up and gently touched my temple, feeling something warm and sticky running down my fingers. "Damned Nazis!" yelled Professor Golubev. "In 1943, at Kursk, my T-34 was struck by a Nazi Tiger tank, flipping us over. They tried to kill me then, and they're trying to kill me now. Listen, you tell the next generation to always remember to fight the Nazis, or else they'll send goddamn space goblins after you or something." "I will, Professor. If we get out of here, I promise I will." From what I could tell, the BTR had flipped over on top of us, trapping us in a small pocket of air under its bulk. I was on my side, pressed against a bed of snow. Alina was in a fetal position next to me, but this may have also been our frozen tomb had it not been for the valiant efforts of the soldiers outside digging us out. 30 frigid minutes later, I was standing in the glorious sunshine of that frigid mountain pass, my head bandaged and my arm in a sling, looking down at the hole which the soldiers had dug under the snow to rescue us. In reality, the situation wasn't as bad as it seemed at the time. The professor, true to his word, had just narrowly gotten us past the edge of the avalanche, which had only just clipped the rear of the BTR, flipping it over, but only burying the back end. Most of the BTR was actually sticking up out of the snow, though it was inverted. "You're very fortunate, Mikhail," said Colonel Andreev, offering me a cigarette. "The MiG pilots managed to radio us your coordinates before they left the station." I leaned over, lighting the cigarette on the colonel's lighter, inhaling deeply. I looked across the overturned BTR to the narrow pass where Alina, attentive as always, was standing next to Professor Golubev, telling him to sit still while the medics checked over him. Golubev was seated on a canvas chair, regaling the two medics of his time in the Great Patriotic War. "So there were four of the Motherland's T-37s against 20 of the fascist Tiger tanks. My tank got 9 of those bastards before the remaining 30 Nazi bastards put my tank out of commission. So this is nothing," he said, waving his hands at the overturned BTR. "Did your friend hit his head, miss?" said one of the medics.
No. At least I don't think so. The professor is always like this. Last week, it was 50 Tiger tanks.
I allowed myself a quick smile. What relationship did sweet young Alina have with her professor, and why was she always so attentive to him? I looked sideways at my cousin. "How much of what we were searching for did you already know existed, Stanislav?" I whispered. "I knew about as much as you will be allowed to report, Mikhail," he answered, lighting a cigarette of his own. Around him, armed soldiers were securing the area looking for surviving comrades, which I knew they would not find. Other soldiers were busily taking pictures of the avalanche and the overturned BTR while the other team of Lieutenant Orlov's unit was scanning the area for traces of radiation, looking to me but not daring to ask what happened to their lieutenant. "So, Major Rogov, Lieutenant Orlov, the other soldiers," I said. "All, unfortunately, lost in the avalanche," said Andreev. "Just like those people who have gone missing this past year. Just as those hikers at what they now call Dyatlov Pass. And just like the demon that was chasing you. All lost to freak avalanches." The colonel took a long drag of his cigarette. "And just like your camera, Mikhail, I'm sorry." Instinctively, I felt for my camera, realizing with horror that all the proof of everything that we had sacrificed and died to find, the Nazi machine, the monster from the void, was somewhere lost under the overturned BTR. "Don't worry, Mikhail," continued Andreev. "We will recover your camera, though I fear it may be too damaged to return to you. No matter though, The pictures which my men were taking of the avalanche will be proof enough of the tragedy which befell Captain Sidorev's men when you post your story." 2 days later, Colonel Andreev's driver brought me, Professor Golubev, and Alina to the train station. By then, almost all traces of the Soviet military ever being at the airport had vanished, although Captain Kravtsov's men remained at the site of the avalanche for an additional week, just in case. My official report to Pravda, which I already suspected had been tossed in the trash, had been redacted and rewritten for me by the military. My cousin, Colonel Andreev, brought me the latest copy of Pravda the morning that we left the airport terminal. As promised, the front page story was a dedication to the heroic Major Rogov, Captain Sidorev, and the rest of the soldiers who were caught up in an avalanche while attempting to find the missing people who, more than likely, had also been swept up in similar, sudden avalanches months earlier. The story was credited to me, Mikhail Zemyenin, a trusted civilian journalist. All the government needed was my name and my presence to lend credence to the narrative that avalanches were the cause of all the lost life in the area surrounding Dyatlov's Pass. Within a week, all of the events at the pass faded into obscurity. In addition, there was absolutely no reporting of the night a highly secretive military convoy which escorted a large, flatbed truck carrying an unusual bell-shaped object under a heavy tarp down from the region of Dyatlov's Pass. Colonel Andreev's men searched me and Professor Golubev thoroughly for any contraband items which might have pointed to a different conclusion from that which the military wanted the world to know. Alina was a different story. She, pretending to be just a naive young girl who simply tagged along behind her mentor, Professor Golubev. The soldiers didn't give her much of a search. The train ride to Koltsovo was quiet, each of us contemplating the events of the last few days and still feeling the shock of being alive. It reminded me of how I felt all those years ago when my airborne unit was in Romania, and I had heard that the war against the fascists was over, and I was still in one piece. Alina sat next to Professor Golubev, sleeping most of the way as the professor regaled me with tales from the war. Sometime later, I excused myself and went to the dining carriage to stretch my legs and to bring some bread and cheese back to our coach. By the time I got back, the professor was already fast asleep, and a few minutes later, I joined them in the blissful void of slumber. It was early evening when our train finally pulled into Koltsovo station, and the call came for those who were leaving to disembark. The professor and Alina gathered their things and opened the door to the coach to leave. Alina hesitated, stopping to turn and kiss me on both cheeks.
It was good to meet you, Mr. Zemyenin. Thank you for protecting me when our vehicle turned over. I would not be here if you hadn't. I wish you much success with the paper.
Alina, I said quietly, before she and Professor Golubev could leave the train at Koltsovo for the connecting train which would take them back to St. Petersburg. Alina looked around as passengers began debarking behind her. Then, seeing as no one was paying her any attention, slipped a small leather pouch out of her bag and handed it to me. "You took a big risk getting this out," I whispered.
I did it for those whom we lost. It's up to you now.
"You make sure that the truth gets out someday, will you, Mikhail?" said the professor before taking Alina's hand and stepping out to blend in with the crowd. "Say, Alina, did I tell you about the time I shot down famous German ace Hans Rudel? It was a cold afternoon as we approached the German border, and a line of fascist Stuka dive bombers ascended from the clouds."
Yes, Professor, but I would be happy to hear the story again.
"Really?" said the professor. "How about the time when I shot a fascist U-boat right out from under them with my tank? We were on the Baltic coast, you see."
Yes, Professor, you told me that one also.
Then it appears that I have no more tales of heroism to tell anymore.
Not even one where you drove a tank while being chased by a horrible monster which the Nazis accidentally brought back with them from the void?
Giggled Alina. "No. replied the professor. Technically, it wasn't a tank, but tell me how that one goes, will you, my girl? I chuckled to myself as I watched the two get swallowed up by the crowd, disappearing down the terminal as a light snow began to fall. I walked back to my now empty coach, clinging tightly to my travel bag as the train pulled out of the station. It took almost 2 days of travel and was well after dark before my train finally arrived to Moscow Station. The weather had warmed up slightly since I had left, and already the first signs of the streets and cobblestone sidewalks were peering tentatively out from under the snow. I debated as to whether or not to call Mr. Satyukov and tell him that I was home, but I decided against it. Not because it was already dark and I was afraid of disturbing him. Quite the opposite. For an older gentleman, Satyukov was quite active, and he'd more than likely want to meet me at a pub for drinks and maybe a bowl of hearty solyanka soup. Mr. Satyukov thinking that the hot meats, sausages, and vegetables in the soup would be just the thing to fill my belly as we discussed my trip. And though I did admit to being hungry, I was rather anxious to get back home to my flat as quickly as possible. There was no telling if there were eyes on me at the moment. It was past 10 o'clock when a cab finally dropped me off at my flat. It was dark inside as I quickly doffed my coat and shoes on my chair, and made my way to the study where I laid my travel bag on the desk. Closing the blinds, I then flicked on the desk lamp, unstrapping my bag and pulling out the small leather pouch, which I had stuffed under my clothes. Unwrapping it, I carefully laid out its contents. There before me sat the journal of Oberst Hans Kimlische, along with the last roll of film from my camera. Leaning back, I sighed deeply. Alina, you clever, clever girl. Pouring myself a glass of vodka, I raised a toast to my cousin, Colonel Andreev, who had, once again, saved me from being devoured by wolves. You were right, Stanislav. I was never good at keeping secrets.